So as we record today, the reality is we in the church also have a preschool. So I'm going to ask forgiveness ahead of time. We have littles running around in the hallway, and so if you hear some noises, don't be alarmed. There were no children harmed in the filming of this podcast, but they do express their exuberance and their joy and sometimes their frustration. So we don't know what will happen, but we're going to go ahead and continue on as if nothing will. Well, hello, my name is John. I'm one of the pastors here at Pleasant Valley, and I have the distinct honor of not just working closely as a care pastor with the counseling center, but I've had the privilege of working with interns that are inbound and then helping to create the counseling center. So I'm so excited to have someone who was an intern with me during the educational season, but Paula Dayringer is also so much more than that. And so we won't talk a lot about you because I know you love to talk about you. But not just as a counselor have you been successful, but also you're a veteran. You spent a number of years in the Missouri National Guard, and so thank you for your service. But I want to talk a little bit about that part of your life and how that fits into the other parts of your story, if you're okay with that.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. And I have the mystery question that I want to start with, right? So,
all right.
Can we agree as veterans that there are some myths that exist about when we put on the suit and then when we take it off and we step back into a civilian role? Can we just agree publicly that we don't feel that the way that people perceive it? So you're Paula. Yes, you were Colonel Dayringer, but that was the same person. You just happened to have a uniform on. Is that fair?
Yes.
Yeah.
It is fair.
And the tools that you used, I'm assuming you used them in both roles, and so maybe people don't think about us that way, but we don't separate it, do we?
You can't.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
cannot.
Okay, so that's a good framework. Then I want to talk a little bit about, we've been working on some conversations revolving around deployment, and I appreciated some interviews that you've done. And what I know about your story is that you have been on both sides of deployment. So military family, in long enough that there were time frames where you were the one deployed.
Yes.
And you were the one, we use this terminology gently, but left behind.
Yes.
So talk to me a little bit about what unique observations do you have because you've been in both roles?
Well, they're definitely different.
Okay.
To be the one who remains at home to keep the home fires burning is more of a juggling act than being deployed. When I'm deployed as a military member, I have one job.
Okay.
There are many duties within that one job,
Right.
but I have one job. When I was the military spouse who remained at home,
Yeah.
I still was a mom. I still was an employee. I still had to pay the bills. I still had to mow the lawn. I still had all these things that, when my husband was with me, we would have partnered on.
Right.
And so I not only had many jobs, I had his jobs.
Yeah.
So just the operational tempo of being, and by operational tempo, I mean the rhythm of life.
Right.
The rhythm of life as a military member at home doubles,
Right.
at least.
Yeah.
And as a soldier, it doesn't have, it's not like, oh, suddenly it's just a very singular focus.
Right. So help me with something that, as a chaplain in the Army, I always joke with people that I'm the keeper of the calendar, because when we get into a large, war fighting type environment, it's Monday number 1, Monday number 2, Monday number 3, and oftentimes people literally will look up and go, oh, what day is this?
Absolutely.
And so that, I hear you mentioning tempo, that is one of the realities that you're talking about, right? In combat, or your every day is kind of the same day. You're just, safety is the priority, and you have a mission, and so, but it's not Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Oh, it's the weekend, isn't it? Right? It's not that, is it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
You can't predict from one
Right.
Monday to the next Monday,
Yeah.
what might happen in theater. But it's not like, oh, it's Tuesday, this is when the kids have piano lessons. Oh, it's Wednesday, all got to go to church. It's Thursday, I make meatloaf. You know, there's that structure
Right.
is not available, which is almost counterintuitive
Yeah.
when you think about the military. What, the military is not structured? No, not downrange. I mean, there are things that we structure that we can,
Right.
but in everything that we structure, the enemy gets a vote.
Right.
And so we're constantly responding to the current threat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to describe that. The other thing that I think is true about us is we're
Us
not,
as veterans,
Yeah,
soldiers,
well, as two human beings that are not teenagers
Oh.
anymore, right?
mature people.
It's entirely possible that your first deployment did not have all the technology of someone deploying today. Is that fair?
That is extremely fair.
And so
I was
you
deployed
communicated
pretty early
differently.
I was deployed pretty early in 2005.
Okay.
So the Iraq War kicked off in March of '03. So 18 months later, I was downrange. So there really wasn't a lot of opportunities that there are now.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about the tempo and the different stresses, right? When you were at home, you would love to communicate with your family members, right, that are downrange, but you also understand the complexity. Not everyone does, right? Sometimes we sit at home thinking, oh, I'll get to call them at 10 o'clock or whatever that is, and you know that that's not always true.
Right. It's you can want it to be true. You can try to make it be true,
Right.
but the enemy gets a vote,
Yeah.
and the lines may be down, or if there's if something has happened and they don't want anybody to be advised of that yet.
Right.
It doesn't need to hit the presses. They will lock down the communication. And
Yeah.
maybe Daddy said he was going to call at 10 o'clock Tuesday night,
Right.
but he can't.
Yeah.
There's a ton of things that can interfere with.
Right. Yeah, I'll never forget the first notification that I did. Social media had beat us to the punch by several hours.
You're talking about a next of kin
Yeah.
because of a casualty.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so we got to, it was a best friend scenario, but social media had long since leaked that. We had protocol about when we would start our
Right.
notification, and so yeah.
Right. And the protocol is intended to protect
Right.
the people that it's going to affect, not to withhold information.
Right.
To make sure that it's delivered carefully and carefully.
Yeah.
So getting ahead of the social media train is not possible anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, so being on either side of that has to be very, very interesting. Let me shift gears a little bit away from the military.
Okay.
You deployed and you served
Yes.
faithfully as a person of faith.
Yes.
So talk to me about how your faith is integrated into not just deployment, but the rest of your life and prepping for all of that and going through the process of going, being, coming home. It's the before, during, after kind of thing.
Yeah. So the sequence for me was my husband deployed in '03
Okay.
to Bosnia. So he was downrange. It was considered combat. It was right on the heels of the Serbia-Croatian war, and it was a peacekeeping, but still a combat theater.
Sure.
For me, I went into I just hunkered down in my faith. Really, every Sunday it was my anchor. Every my contact with my church family, it was my anchor.
Yeah.
As a side note, one of the things that was frustrating about that is that everyone asked how my soldier was doing, and nobody asked how I was doing. And sometimes I just wanted someone to say, "How are you doing?
Yeah.
Do you need anything? Do you need some help? You need some help mowing the yard?
Right.
Anything?"
Yeah.
So that was a little bit of a push-pull.
Right.
And then when I deployed, my faith was really strong at that point. And it was a good thing Because
Yeah.
when I arrived in theater in Iraq, and you and I have never talked about this before, I don't think, but the oppression of where we were when we were there,
Yeah.
the spiritual oppression felt so real to me. It was as though, or as if, there was a hand clamped over my spiritual mouth, and I literally struggled to pray.
Yeah.
And I relied so heavily on what I knew to be true,
Yeah.
not what was in front of me,
Yeah.
which I knew was temporary, but what I knew to be true for eternity, and the intercessory prayers of those that I
Yeah.
knew were praying for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really, really positive truth. I know General Dees in his Resilient trilogy, right, the different books that he wrote about resiliency, one of his truth proclamations is, and he claims that it's a quote. I actually found the original quote from a POW, a chaplain that was part of the Bataan Death March, but he said when pulled out of a solitary confinement situation as a POW. They said, "Hey, chaplain, give us a word," and what he said immediately was, "Don't believe in the dark, or don't doubt in the dark what you believed in the light."
Exactly.
And so that's what I hear you describing is and I've heard other soldiers talk through that. My own son talked about what he saw and how this isn't real. This can't be real, and it's so different environmentally.
Yep.
And the surge, like that's a part of the war that was pretty complex too. So
Right. And I was there just before the surge.
yeah,
The base that I was on, it's called Joint Base Balad now. We call it Camp Anaconda, or AKA Mortaritaville, wasting away in Mortaritaville. The base was attacked more than 365 times in 1 year.
yeah,
So they really liked to go hard at us during holidays,
yeah,
and the DFAC was one of the places because they knew people would come in for food.
right. Places where people gathered.
Places where people gather.
Yeah. Well, I do appreciate also what you said about the questions that come at those that are not deployed, because we have now evolved as a military. One of the things that I get to do as a chaplain is make sure that people that are deploying have a family plan. And so we talk about the community surrounding the person who is going to be at home, and we want people to ask, okay, so we assume soldiers okay, how are you? Okay, so let me shift gears a little bit. I want you to answer this holistically. So counselor, veteran, person of faith. If someone comes to you and they say, Paula, I would really like to work proactively on resiliency. You've survived some things, right? So you have a resiliency about you. We can assume that without even diving into the elements of it or me asking all the ingredients, right? I know that you're a resilient person. How would you help somebody start working on resiliency, civilian or veteran?
So as cliche as this may sound, the Serenity Prayer covers that. And that is, God grant me the wisdom to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Yeah.
It's a good one.
So, and that's about letting go of control. That which is outside my control, I cannot influence. And therefore, I am not responsible. And if I'm not responsible, I have no authority. If I have no authority, it is outside my control. So there you go. So you just have to really figure out your boundaries, where you begin and where the issue ends. And I had some really good advice early in my career life as a soldier. And there are two things. So salty Lieutenant Colonel, he says, LT, the hotter things get, the cooler you gotta be.
Wow.
Right?
It's a t-shirt.
It's a t-shirt. Yeah. And the other one is it a problem or is it a fact? Problems can be solved. Facts have to be accepted.
Wow. I've not heard that one before.
Right?
That's a good one.
It is a good one.
So what's interesting about that is I know when there is a statistic that says 1% of the nation's population will serve in the military, and it's a very small percentage.
Yeah.
And I tell people often, as someone who's not severely young and has been doing this for a minute, I've been in both worlds. I spent a couple decades in corporate America and now a little time in uniform. And I tell people, one of the things that people don't understand about the military is it is really an environment of inconvenience.
Absolutely.
So sit and wait. Not everything always makes sense. The food in the DFAC doesn't have to be good.
Nope.
And so
And often won't
those
be.
are things we don't control, right?
Right.
And young soldiers sometimes struggle because they want to know, why doesn't this make sense, or why can't we get there faster? My son, it took him 50 hours to get home when he
Okay.
deployed, and
Yes.
that was lots of layovers and this and that. And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Was he traveling on military transport or civilian?
Both.
Okay.
And
Some
so
of each
it was a
complicates
mix
it.
and a match from Europe to the Middle East to
Yes.
home and all of that. So
Yes.
yeah. So to be able to make this something that someone can get a takeaway and maybe grow out of or understand veterans better, right? Is there a truth about deployment that you think most civilians don't understand or have context for that you could maybe clear up for us?
Thankfully, there's only one Normandy Beach. There's only one Heartbreak Ridge.
Yeah.
There's only a few named battles.
Right.
Everything else falls under people's radar. Now that doesn't mean that that things don't happen under those radars.
Yeah.
But it's not that intense. It's not Band of Brothers every day, all day.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a great show out called 12 Strong. And they've taken an entire mission, months of a mission,
Right.
and condensed it into a 2-hour movie.
Right.
And so when you watch that, you think, oh my gosh, this is just action, danger, danger.
Yeah.
Well, that's perhaps 6 months crammed into 2 hours.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of inconvenience going along.
Right.
A lot of patience. We Americans are not strong in patience.
Yeah.
Middle East, they have nothing but time.
Yeah.
It's all about
compression.
time. Right. They will wait us out.
Yeah.
And so we have to know that that is part of their strategy.
Yeah.
So we have to be patient waiting as well.
Yeah.
And the Army's not stupid. The Army is so far from stupid. But there are stupid things that happen.
Right.
But then again, there's stupid things that happen at McDonald's
Right.
or the local church or anything.
Right.
There are frustrations no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing.
Yeah.
There are frustrations. And until you have experienced those frustrations and learned to integrate frustration
Right.
as a part of life,
Mm-hmm.
then you're going to continue to be frustrated.
Yeah. So waiting at a stop sign is not any different than waiting in uniform somewhere maybe a little warmer, a little colder, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So that's really good. I want to integrate a really fun, happy story, right? So I know that there is a story about you being downrange and your son being downrange,
Yes.
and the two of you bumping into each other.
Yes. So my son is in the Air National Guard, the Missouri Air National Guard.
Okay.
And as it turned out, I was deployed to Iraq, and later he was deployed to Iraq. He was 24 at the time.
Okay.
And but we were not in the same place. We were about at least 50 kilometers away from one another.
Right.
And 50 kilometers in Iraq might as well be 1,000 miles.
Right.
Because getting to and from securely is no small thing.
Yep.
And he had called me to let me know when he was in country. Eventually, he was able to call.
Right.
And then he said, maybe I can make it up sometime because that's where we do our supply runs, is to Balad.
Yeah.
I'm like, great. So he calls, he says, I'm headed up, I think, but it depends on this and it depends on that, and if we
Right.
can get the So I wait for him. I do my work and I wait for him and I wait for him. About 8 o'clock at night, I'm like, well, I'm gonna go get some supper. Go get some supper, come back, wait. 10 o'clock, like, okay, it's not gonna happen today.
Yeah.
And he couldn't call me. He couldn't.
Right.
I mean, there was
Yeah.
no way to communicate that. So I secure for the night, and about midnight, boom, boom, boom. There's a knock on my door, and I open up the door, and there's my kid.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And my first thought was not as a military member, not as, my first thought was, what the heck are you doing here? You can't be here. You have to go home. You know? I mean, it was just instantaneous.
He must have escaped.
He escaped, yeah. Yeah. But it was great. It was great to see him and have just that brief moment of time. And the Air Guard deployments at that time were much shorter than the Army's Guards deployments. And so his time to go home came long before mine did.
Yeah.
And when I knew he was gone, the world felt just a little less familiar.
Wow.
I hated him being there,
Yeah.
but man, it was good to see him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a unique story. Not every family will have that. The circumstances had to really, really align carefully, because I know that's just, you can be close to somebody and not get at them in that scenario.
Absolutely.
So, what a great story. Well, I appreciate your transparency. I appreciate you sharing. I know that it's interesting when we sit down and talk together as people who have been in uniform, even though our stories are very, very different. I have never served at the same time in the same place, but
Right.
but another thing I know about resiliency is the common language is always helpful, and so I appreciate you sharing
Right.
some normalcy that you found because of your resiliency and your faith in a really, really stressed environment.
And because of intercessory prayer, the prayers
Yeah.
of others.
Oh yeah, let the church never stop praying
Yes.
for those that are in harm's way and
Yeah.
those that are not. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it.